You won't believe how a single act of kindness in a grocery store turned into a life-changing moment. When Barron Trump secretly paid for a struggling single mom's groceries, her reaction was something no one expected. And what happened next will melt your heart. It was a chilly Saturday morning, the kind where people hurried through their errands, eager to escape the crisp winter air. The neighborhood grocery store was busier than usual, with families picking out fresh produce and kids sneaking candy bars into their parents' carts. The faint hum of Christmas music played over the store's speakers, a reminder that the holidays were just around the corner. The checkout lanes were lined with people bundled in coats and scarves, their carts full of everyday items: milk, bread, eggs. Some looked tired, others distracted, but most were just trying to get through their day. In one of the lanes stood a woman named Angela. She was in her mid-30s, her long brown hair tucked under a knit cap. Her eyes were kind but tired, the kind of tired that came from working long hours and carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Beside her, a little girl no older than 6 clung to her hand, looking up at her with wide, trusting eyes. She had Angela's same dark hair, but her face was full of curiosity and innocence. Angela's cart wasn't overflowing like the others. It held the basics: a loaf of bread, a gallon of milk, a pack of diapers, and a small bag of apples. She had paused at the register, her hand hovering over her wallet as she mentally calculated the total. She hated this part, hoping she had enough to cover it all without overdrawing her account. She didn't want her daughter to see her worry, so she forced a small smile and whispered, "Almost done, sweetheart." A few lanes over, Barron Trump stood with his own small basket. Dressed in a simple gray hoodie and jeans, he looked like any other teenager out running an errand. He had slipped into the store quietly, as he often did, hoping to avoid attention. In his basket were just a few items: a bottle of water, a snack, and a few things he'd promised to pick up for home. As Barron waited in line, his eyes wandered. He wasn't in a rush, and people watching had always been a quiet habit of his. That's when he noticed Angela. The worry on her face was subtle, but it was there. She kept glancing at her wallet, her shoulders tense as if bracing for something she couldn't avoid. Barron's gaze shifted to the little girl beside her. She was clutching a small stuffed animal, her eyes lighting up as she chatted softly with her mom. It was a simple moment, but something about it caught Barron's attention. He didn't know their story, but he could sense that they were carrying more than just groceries. He couldn't look away. There was something about Angela's quiet strength and the little girl's innocent trust that pulled at him. And in that moment, a thought crossed his mind, one that would set everything in motion. Angela stood at the register, her smile fading as the cashier scanned the last item and announced the total. It wasn't much by most standards, just over $30, but to Angela, it felt like a mountain. She glanced down at her wallet, her fingers hesitating as she flipped it open. She already knew what was inside: a couple of crumpled bills and a debit card she wasn't sure had enough left to cover the groceries. Her daughter tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, can we get cookies next time?" she asked, her voice full of hope. Angela forced a smile, blinking back the sting in her eyes. "Of course, sweetheart. Next time." The cashier, a young man who looked like he was in college, gave Angela a polite but tired smile, waiting as she fumbled through her wallet. The people in line behind her shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between their phones and the slow-moving transaction. Angela felt the heat of their silent judgment, and her hands began to tremble. Barron, a few lanes over, had noticed the scene. At first, it was just the way Angela stood. Rigid, she was carrying an invisible weight. Then it was the way she hesitated, counting and recounting her money, her movements quick but uncertain. He didn't know her story, but he didn't need to. "Huh?" He recognized the look on her face. It was a mix of embarrassment, worry, and quiet determination. She was used to struggling but refused to let it show in front of her daughter. Barron's chest tightened. He didn't know why this moment was hitting him so hard. Maybe it was because he wasn't used to seeing struggles like this up close. Or maybe it was because, despite her obvious stress, Angela never let it show in her voice when she spoke to her daughter. She stayed calm, steady, strong. The cashier cleared his throat, breaking Barron's train of thought. Angela looked up quickly, her cheeks flushing. I'm sorry, she said softly. Just give me a second. She pulled out her debit card and swiped it, holding her breath as the machine processed the payment. A second later, the dreaded message appeared. Insufficient funds. Angela's heart sank. I think I can pay part of it with cash, she said, her voice shaking now. She fished out the bills from her wallet, smoothing them out nervously. Can we just take off a few items? The milk and, she hesitated, her eyes darting to the diapers. She couldn't take those off. Her daughter needed them. Barron felt his stomach twist. He glanced at the cashier, who nodded politely and began removing items from the order. Angela's shoulders slumped slightly, though she kept her face as composed as she could manage. But it was the little girl's voice that broke something in Barron. "Mommy, are we not getting the apples?" she asked, her small hand clutching the edge of the counter. Her tone wasn't upset, just confused. Angela smiled at her daughter, her eyes filled with a quiet sadness. "Not today, honey," she said softly. "But we'll get them soon. I promise." Barron looked at the small pile of groceries, the bare essentials, and felt an overwhelming urge to act. He didn't know this woman or her daughter, but he couldn't stand the thought of them leaving the store without the things they needed. He glanced at his own basket, a bottle of water, a snack. It was nothing compared to what Angela was trying to buy. He made his decision before he even realized it. Grabbing his wallet, Barron left his line and walked toward Angela's. He moved quickly, his heart pounding as he approached the cashier. "I'll cover it," he said, his voice calm but firm. Angela spun around, her eyes wide with shock. "What? No, you don't have to do that." Barron shook his head. "I want to," he said simply, handing his card to the cashier. "Please." The cashier hesitated for a moment before nodding and ringing up the remaining items. Angela stood frozen, her mouth slightly open as she tried to process what was happening. "You really don't have to do this," she said again, her voice breaking slightly. "I'll figure it out." Barron smiled gently. "It's okay, really. Let me help." Angela's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away, glancing at her daughter. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." As the transaction finished, Barron stepped back, watching as the cashier bagged the groceries. The little girl looked up at him, her face glowing with pure joy. "You're like a superhero," she said, clutching her stuffed animal tightly. Barron chuckled softly, his heart warming at her words. "Not a superhero," he said. "Just happy to help." The moment hung in the air as Angela clutched the grocery bag tightly, her fingers trembling. She looked down at her daughter, then back at Barron, still trying to process what had just happened. Strangers didn't usually step in like this, at least not in her world. "You didn't have to do that," Angela said again, her voice softer now, tinged with both gratitude and disbelief. "I don't even know how to thank you." Barron shrugged slightly, his face calm but his mind racing. He wasn't used to being in situations like this. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "I just thought, it looked like you could use a little help." Angela glanced down at her daughter, who was still beaming, her small arms wrapped around the stuffed animal. I just... Her words trailed off as her emotions bubbled to the surface, her throat tightening. She looked away quickly, trying to regain her composure. The cashier cleared his throat awkwardly, clearly not used to this kind of scene. "That was really nice of you, man," he said to Barron, his voice breaking the tension. "Not a lot of people would have done that." Barron nodded, offering a small, polite smile. He didn't know what to say. He hadn't done this for attention or praise. He had just seen someone struggling and acted. But now that it was over, he felt exposed, like all eyes were on him. Angela shifted her weight, still clutching the bag. "It's been a tough few months," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. This means more than you know." Barron could see it in her eyes, the weight she carried every day. It wasn't just about groceries. It was about everything. Bills, work, raising her daughter. She didn't need to explain. He could feel it. "It's okay," Barron said softly. "Really." Her daughter, still smiling, tugged at her mom's sleeve. "Mommy, can we get cookies next time?" Angela let out a small, breathy laugh, her eyes glistening. Maybe sooner than next time, she said, her voice cracking slightly. She looked back at Barron. Thanks to him, as Angela and her daughter began to leave, Barron turned back to his own basket, thinking the moment was over. But then something unexpected happened. The cashier leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Hey," he said, "I don't know if you noticed, but she left something behind." Barron looked up, confused. The cashier motioned toward the counter, where a small, worn wallet sat. It was Angela's. Barron picked it up, feeling the cracked leather under his fingers. He could see it wasn't just any wallet. It had been used for years, the edges frayed and the color faded. Inside, he caught a glimpse of a folded piece of paper tucked into the card slots. He didn't mean to look, but the edge of it was sticking out, and the words on it were handwritten in a child's scrawl. "To Mommy. You're the best mommy in the world. I love you." Barron's chest tightened. He could almost hear the little girl's voice as he imagined her handing the note to her mom, full of pride and love. Angela might have been struggling, but her daughter saw her as a hero. Without hesitation, Barron grabbed his bag and headed toward the parking lot. Angela and her daughter were walking slowly, their pace matching the little girl's small steps. Excuse me," Barron called out, quickening his pace. Angela turned, her face a mix of surprise and concern. "Oh no, did I forget something?" she asked. "You left this," Barron said, holding up the wallet. Angela's eyes widened and she let out a shaky laugh. "Oh my gosh, thank you. I don't know where my head is today." As she reached for it, Barron hesitated for a moment. "Can I say something?" he asked. Angela blinked, confused. "Of course." "I don't know your story," Barron began, his voice careful but sincere. "But I can see how hard you're trying. And I just want you to know that it's enough. You're doing great." Angela froze. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, to Barron's surprise, she wiped a tear from her cheek and let out a soft, trembling laugh. "You don't know how much I needed to hear that," she said. Her daughter looked up at Barron, her small face serious now. "Are you an angel?" she asked, tilting her head. Barron chuckled, shaking his head. "Not even close." Angela laughed through her tears, holding her daughter close. "He's just a kind person, sweetheart," he said, brushing her daughter's hair back. She turned to Barron. "And that's rare these days." As they walked away, Barron stood there for a moment, watching them disappear into the crowd. He felt something he hadn't expected. Something that went beyond the simple satisfaction of helping someone. A feeling that spiraled through him and transformed his mind. It was a quiet sense of purpose, like he'd done exactly what he was meant to do in that moment. The cashier's voice broke his thoughts again. "Hey man," he called from the door. "That was awesome." Barron nodded, smiling faintly. He didn't feel like a hero or a saint. He just felt human. And maybe, he thought, that was enough. Barron stood quietly near the store's entrance, watching as Angela and her daughter walked toward the parking lot. He thought the moment had ended, but as he turned to leave, something unexpected happened. A woman in line nearby, holding a toddler on her hip, stepped forward and said, "I saw what you did. That was really kind of you." Barron gave a small, humble shrug. "It wasn't a big deal," he replied, his voice calm but unsure how to respond. The woman smiled, shaking her head. "Maybe to you it wasn't, but to her, I promise you, it was everything." The man behind her, who had been standing in line earlier, chimed in. "It's rare to see people help like that these days. You made her day, and probably her month." The words hit Barron harder than he expected. He wasn't used to being praised for something so simple. All he'd done was step in when he saw someone struggling, but now, seeing how the small crowd of bystanders reacted, he realized his actions hadn't gone unnoticed. Angela suddenly appeared again at the entrance, her daughter skipping happily beside her. She held the grocery bag in one hand and clutched the wallet Barron had returned in the other. She hesitated for a moment before walking back up to him. "I didn't want to leave without saying this," Angela said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I don't know who you are, but you didn't just help me buy groceries today. You reminded me that there are good people in the world, and I haven't felt that in a long time." Barron's chest tightened as he listened. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. "I'm glad I could help," he said quietly. Angela crouched down and looked at her daughter. "Sweetheart, what do we say to someone who does something kind for us?" The little girl grinned up at Barron, holding her stuffed animal tightly. "Thank you," she said cheerfully. Then, after a moment, she added, "You're like a real superhero." The simplicity of her words brought a warmth to Barron's chest that he couldn't explain. He chuckled softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm not a superhero," he said. "Just someone who got lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time." Angela stood and looked at him with a small, knowing smile. "That's what makes you one." As Angela turned to leave, the cashier, who had been quietly watching the entire exchange, leaned across the counter and said, "Man, I hope you know you just made everyone's day, including mine." Barron nodded, his smile faint but genuine. "Thanks," he said simply. As he stepped out into the parking lot, Barron felt a sense of peace he hadn't expected. The weight of the day, the emotions of the moment, it all settled in his chest, not as a burden, but as something lighter, something meaningful. Angela was already buckling her daughter into the car. She glanced over her shoulder and gave Barron one last wave before driving off. He waved back, feeling a quiet sense of gratitude. For a moment, Barron stood there, looking at the sky as the sun began to set. He realized something important. Small acts of kindness, no matter how simple, can create ripples far beyond what we can see. Angela and her daughter would leave the store with groceries, but they'd also leave with hope. Hope that people cared, even strangers. Barron knew he didn't need to be thanked or recognized. The look on Angela's face, the little girl's smile, that was more than enough. And as he turned to head home, he couldn't help but think, maybe being in the right place at the right time is what really makes a difference. As Barron walked away from the store, the memory of Angela and her daughter lingered in his mind. It wasn't the groceries or the wallet or even the kind words that stuck with him the most. It was the look in their eyes, the gratitude, the relief, and the small spark of hope that hadn't been there before. In life, it's easy to assume that small actions don't matter, that one kind gesture is just a drop in an endless ocean of problems. But what Barron realized in that moment was the opposite. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness have the greatest impact. For Angela, it wasn't just about groceries. It was about being seen, being reminded that she wasn't alone in her struggles. For her daughter, it was about seeing a stranger's kindness and learning what it meant to help others. And for Barron, it was a moment of understanding that even the simplest decisions, like stepping out of your own lane to help someone else, could ripple out in ways you might never fully understand. The truth is, we all face challenges, some visible, some hidden. But when we choose to extend kindness, we create connections that transcend those struggles. Whether it's paying for someone's groceries, offering a word of encouragement, or even just being present for someone who needs it, every small act matters. It matters because it reminds us that we're not as alone as we think we are. Barron thought back to the little girl's words, "You're like a superhero." At the time, he'd laughed it off, but now he saw the truth in it. Being a hero doesn't mean doing something grand or impossible. It means choosing to act when it matters most. It means seeing someone else's need and doing what you can to fill it, even if it feels small. As he walked into the fading light of the evening, Barron felt a quiet sense of purpose. He hadn't solved Angela's problems or changed her world overnight, but he'd been there when it mattered, and that, he realized, was enough. In the end, the takeaway was simple. Kindness isn't just a gift, it's a responsibility. One small act, one moment of compassion can remind someone that they're not forgotten, and maybe, just maybe, that's all it takes to make the world a little brighter. If this story touched your heart, imagine how many others it could inspire. Kindness has the power to change lives, one small act at a time. Share this video with someone who needs a little hope today, and let's spread the message of compassion together. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the good we're capable of. Turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of inspiration.